Thanks, Councillor Corla. Just a chance to say a few words on this bill. Everyone, thanks for the chance to discuss it and to go through it. Just before I start that, though, and I go back on the voids mentioned, it's not true, Deputy, to say we haven't tackled voids, and I think even your own party spokesperson will recognise that. It doesn't mean that we're not sometimes annoyed that some local authorities are a little bit slow to turn them around. You mentioned Limerick here in 2018, they were mentioned after that as well. That time we checked it, and Limerick were allocated the resources they needed to bring those voids back into operation, both the rural ones and the urban ones. But the voids programme in general has brought back in 10,000 houses over the last couple of years. So there's a lot of issues. Yeah, and I'm answering your question, so I presume you raised it to get any information on it. You raised it here a couple of years ago. We checked it out. Money was allocated, and Limerick didn't spend it as quick as they should have, but they did eventually. The houses you're mentioning now, I'll check them again, but I suspect there are another round of voids, of new houses that become voids. If they're the same ones, that's a different story. I doubt they are, because over 10,000 voids have been brought back into the system over the last couple of years, and rightly so. They shouldn't have been left empty for so long. But thankfully, that's one area that I think we can agree on. There's a lot of progress has been made on as well. It doesn't mean it's perfect, but there should be very few long-term voids left in the system anymore. And every local authority were told here last October 2018 to put in for any extra resources they wanted to bring, any voids they had, including Limerick, written to specifically. And if you have any more voids, let us know, and the resource was there to fix them. So I won't take that criticism. I'll take other criticisms, but not that one, just to be clear on that one as well. But if you're saying there's that many, we'll check them out again, because maybe they're new ones. Chair, there's a couple of questions on this bill. First of all, Minister Murphy clearly outlined our position at the outset of this discussion, that this government is all too aware of the challenges posed by the rental market and the impact on renters. We acknowledge and we know that the rents are too high for many, many people. There's no disputing that. The figures are there, they're recorded. So our opposition to this bill is an evidence-based position, derived from evaluating the medium and long-term outcomes from accrued interventions such as this. And it's not something that we've not researched. We have checked this out, we've looked at this, we've looked at the evidence, and we don't agree with it. Now, I accept that Sinn Féin hold this view, and have held it for a long number of years. I'm not disputing that. So I know you genuinely are bringing it forward in good faith. I don't think it'll have the right outcome that you think it will, but we'll differ on that. And I do think it probably, and in fairness, you bring forward some well thought out policies and proposals, and I respect that. This one, I do think you're wrong, and there's no evidence to back you up that you're right, and only time will tell which of us is right on this one. But there isn't any evidence to show. And in fact, the evidence that you do, that we can see, shows the opposite, that it has hit supply. So there's issues there that need to be looked at, but we don't agree with it purely from an evidence-based point of view. But I do respect that it's a view he's held. I think it's wrong, but there we go. But I think Fianna Fáil's view is a dangerous view to be having, flip-flopping around when it comes to rent controls and rent freezes and rent pressures and different opinions on it. We've had it before here with your previous spokespersons, and we have it again. It's not a good way to develop housing policy. And I listened to Dara earlier on, and he's not here to take the criticism, but I listened to him earlier on, and I don't believe he's actually supporting the bill at all. And I think John O'Sullivan, it might be conned, John, maybe you didn't hear all the interviews, and I'm not sure Deputy O'Brien has been conned on this, because he knows well that Fianna Fáil are claiming to support this because it's a populist stance and it sounds cool. But I wonder, would they vote for it in committee next week or the week after? So the chances of you bringing it through committee in the next couple of weeks are very slim, because I think it's quite clear that it's a holding position of Fianna Fáil. They don't really believe it, which possibly is a positive in one way, but they're claiming because it sounds good to be forward as well. And I listened to a lot of the Fianna Fáil, and I'm only going to concentrate on Fianna Fáil for a few minutes in this. And I'm sorry, Deputy Catherine, that I'm doing this, because I know you want me to go through other stuff, but this has to be said. I listened for a few hours last week to Fianna Fáil speakers, and again tonight. And there's a trend coming through here that they're the party to be left in charge of housing. Ooh, well, we've seen that before, and we had that, and we know where that got us. And it wasn't a positive outcome. I listened to your spokespersons tonight, and again, they're talking about a generation renting. I have no problem admitting rents are far too high now, far too high. They're not going to be for a generation. They're temporary, and we'll deal with them. Already you can see them, even the DARF reports would say that they've reached their height, they're beginning to come back down, and that's because of supply. And we'll keep honing in on that. All the changes the rent prices owned, I've no doubt we will get those rents back down again. So it won't be for a generation. They're absolutely too high now today. But that's different to what Fianna Fáil had, the so-called party of home ownership. I'm listening to the speeches again tonight and last week. People of my generation, and many other generations around that, were left with 30 or 40-year mortgages of massive high inflated prices. And they're left with them for 30 or 40 years. Not a couple of years of paying too high a rent, which is definitely unfair to anybody and too high, but 30 or 40-year mortgages they had at 100% for properties that weren't worth that price, mortgages that weren't sustainable. That's the Fianna Fáil way. Stick you with a mortgage that you should never have had in the first place for your whole life. not for a couple of years. So this thing of Fianna Fáil being a bit of home ownership, it's hard to take, I have to say, week after week, and certainly in the last couple of weeks it's really heightened up. And I'm sorry, Deputy Case, that you have to listen to this again tonight, because in fairness, you're not one that does that. But the rest of your colleagues do it, and repeatedly do it. And again, actually, if they really want to claim that, I said last week to people, maybe go back and check the figures about home ownership before you start telling me that my party, my government or other parties are the ones changing home ownership. We're not the ones that changed it. Just to be very, very clear on this, so in case anyone wants to listen into the stats about this as well, home ownership in Ireland peaked at 79.3% in 1991 and has fallen continuously since then. And the people who are in government most time was Fianna Fáil. And just to be very clear, where it's at today, in the last couple of years, is about 67.6%. The biggest drop of ownership was when Fianna Fáil were in government and when they were in charge. So the stats are there. And actually, in my own ownership, the private rented landlord, the highest amount was when Fianna Fáil were in charge, back in 2006. That's when the home ownership changed, in all those years. So let's be clear about that. And those who were lucky enough to get a house were unlucky enough to be stuck with a mortgage that wasn't sustainable. That's what Fianna Fáil are about when it comes to housing. So coming in here week after week, trying to claim this thing about and rewrite the stats around home ownership, well, they're there, they're recorded. They can't be rewritten because they're factual. So if you're going to keep going with that mantra, check the stats first before we come back in here and debate this even further as well. There was a couple of people asked about going back through rebuilding Ireland. We did that last week, and I'm happy to do it again next week, but I want to stick on this bill here tonight if I can. But I'm happy to go back through it as well. But we all recognise homeless families are far, far too high, and one of the highest ever. No one's denying that. But likewise, so is the social housing bill programme. In 2020, it is and will be the highest in the last 20 years in this country, through boom times and difficult times. The highest social housing bill output, direct build. I'm not even including the other houses that we will acquire, the voids, empty houses, all that as well, and things like that, and leasing and so on. On top of that, that's different. But on direct social housing bill, it will be the highest next year. And I have no problem analysing facts and going through that. But please also look from our side too. We will listen to you, but vice versa. When we present facts and figures, we're not making them up. They're there to be teased about and argued about, but they're there. So it's a two-way conversation when it comes to that as well. And another thing I will say, and I know homeless families are far too high. And again, thousands of families left last year, thousands more will leave next year, and rightly so. We have to get people out of emergency accommodation into permanent houses. I can't stress that enough. But thankfully, one area that there is a fair bit of progress on is around people who are sleeping rough. And I think that's there for everyone to see. There's a major intervention there. Everybody supports that. It's taxpayers' money through government support, through NGOs, through all the different agencies. Everybody's pulling the weight there. And thankfully, people who are rough sleeping is well down. And it's certainly a lot lower than what would have been during so-called boom years as well. So there's some progress being made there. A lot more work needed when it comes to homeless families, get people out of emergency accommodation. No one's denying that as well. So I just want to be clear on that as well, because we have to focus in on what is happening out there as best we possibly can as well. Again, when it comes back to the bill will possibly, in our view, only add to the woes of renters, further reducing supply, restricting movement, disproportionately hitting would-be new entrants, and driving some tenants into the black market situations where they could be paying rents far above those permitted under the RPZs, and depriving them of the tenant protection measures and minimum standards, all of which have been enhanced under the tenure of this government, and accept all of which were supported here in the last couple of months. Vital changes that were made that will have an impact. And already the RTB have strengthened their team, put more people out there, are taking more enforcement cases, and have big plans to take on an awful lot of cases next year, sending a very strong message to the private rental market, which does need a lot of intervention. And that's why we're doing that. And I think those measures will strengthen the rent pressure zones and other parts of the rental market as well that we're doing. And we will see a lot of developments over the next 12 months as well in that space. And I think rents will steady, and we can see where the rent pressure zone rules are implemented, rents are beginning to steady. A lot of progress to go yet, no one's denying that as well, so I want to be clear on that too. But we do strongly believe, and I think Berlin is a good example of where you intervene with rent pressures and even just to talk of them, rent controls and rent freezes. Look what's happened in the supply of Berlin. In a year, it's down, planned activity is down by 40%. Well before it actually happened, but just a conversation. And that's why when I say it's dangerous of a Fianna Fáil's conversation, I accept Sinn Féin have the view, and everyone knows that view, and that's there as well. The bill also proposes to treat social housing tenancies very differently. Maybe it's a mistake in the bill, I'm not sure, but it would lead to an extraordinary situation where private tenancies are subject to a rent freeze, whereas housing assistance the RAS scheme rents would not be increased, or could be increased without any restriction as well. Given that the earlier RPZs came into force less than 3 years ago, The replacement with a straight rent freeze is highly likely to damage market sentiment. Potential investors could opt to direct investment elsewhere. There's other areas they can invest in, not least due to the fears that the state's approach to rent control has become unpredictable. And again, even going back to my college days, investors, be they local investors, be they funds from abroad, be they credit union funds and so on, they do like some certainty. And there is some rent predictability there, but an actual rent freeze can deter investment. It is proven to do that as well. But also, when you interfere in the markets too much, I know people claim we were too much pro-market, but if you interfere too much, it does affect other investments when it comes to job creation and so on as well, not just housing too. It is a dangerous place to go to overstep the market. That's the warning we would say in this space as well.
Right, thank you.